Good afternoon. I'm Kelly McCutcheon, President of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, and on behalf of the Foundation and our co-sponsors, the CASEnergy Coalition, I'd like to welcome you to a special briefing on nuclear energy being broadcast live from Atlanta, Georgia. We are happy to have with us Dr. Patrick Moore, who is the co-chairman of CASEnergy. He's been a leader in the international environmental community for over 30 years. He's a co-founder of Greenpeace. He served 9 years as president of Greenpeace Canada and for 7 years as a director of Greenpeace International. He's an accomplished author. In 2000, Dr. Moore published Trees Are the Answer, a book providing insight into how forests work and how they can play a powerful role in solving many of our current environmental problems. That's very appropriate here in Georgia, where we have 25 million acres of forest land, which covers 2/3 of our state. Most recently, last year, Dr. Moore published Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout, The Making of a Sensible Environmentalist. Today, Dr. Moore will be discussing the future of nuclear energy in the United States. His remarks are entitled, An Update on the Nuclear Renaissance. Dr. Moore.
Thanks very much, Kelly. Good afternoon, everyone, and especially to those members of the Clean and Safe Energy Coalition that are tuned in today. It's great to have the opportunity to update you. The Clean and Safe Energy Coalition, CASEnergy, has now existed for 5 years, and during that time we have built a very strong, wide coalition ranging from big labor and big business to lots of small labor and small business, and politicians, former politicians, academics, and members of the community, to where we now represent tens of millions of people through all of our membership, people who have stated that they support new nuclear build in the United States. It's going to be a great day for nuclear energy on Thursday, when the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is expected to grant the combined construction and operating licenses for 2 new nuclear plants in Vogtle, Georgia, which is why it's great to be in Georgia today. These are Westinghouse APR 1000 reactors, and hopefully they will soon be followed by approval for 2 new reactors in South Carolina, and it won't be long until there's 4 nuclear power plants under construction in the United States for the first time in 30 years. Of course, at the global level, the nuclear renaissance is well underway. There are 60 nuclear reactors under construction worldwide today, most of them in Asia, but some in Europe and now to come in the United States, and many other countries, including the United Kingdom, Finland, Sweden, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, are either planning or in early planning stages to build new nuclear reactors. Many countries who've never had nuclear power before will be entering the age of nuclear energy in the coming years and decades. The global picture, of course, has been influenced greatly during the past nearly a year by the Fukushima incident in Japan. I'd just like to talk about that a bit because it's still on everybody's mind. It was a terrible disaster that happened in Japan. Between 20 and 25,000 people perished in the tsunami that followed one of the largest earthquakes in recorded history. And of course, the Fukushima nuclear plant was very badly crippled by that tsunami. It is really important to remember, though, that no one died from radiation at Fukushima, and according to the best experts in radiology, especially those at the Nuclear Effects Research Foundation in Hiroshima, where they have followed 100,000 survivors of the atomic bombs over the last decades and know very well what level of radiation it takes to produce what health impact in populations, they have said very clearly that there's simply no point in spending money on a follow-up health study at Fukushima because no one was exposed to sufficient radiation to cause long-term health problems, and there will be no discernible health effect in that population. It didn't help, though, that the media almost made it seem, I remember one headline on CNN, it said, nuclear crisis deepens as bodies wash ashore, almost as if the nuclear plant had caused the tsunami. And so that kind of journalism, which was fairly widespread during the sensationalism following the Fukushima incident, really did affect a lot of people's thinking. Nonetheless, almost to one's amazement, the support for nuclear energy in the United States and most other countries that have nuclear energy programs or are anticipating them has remained strong. There's still a very solid majority of Americans who support nuclear energy. And that is very good news, because if we allowed an incident like Fukushima to stop us from moving forward, it would be extremely irrational on our part. In the same way that nobody has ever been harmed by nuclear energy in the United States, there has only been one accident that harmed people, and that was the Chernobyl accident in the Ukraine, which was a reactor design that should never have been built. I think many people know that now, and which are being phased out and will never be built again. Reactors such as the ones at Fukushima and the ones in the United States simply cannot produce that kind of accident, actually exploding in the way they did. It's interesting too that there wasn't much news about it, but the Nuclear Regulatory Commission announced a draft study that they've completed, that they started in 2007, on the possible effects of the most severe nuclear accident that U.S. reactors could face, that is including full loss of power, station blackout, and all the rest, as happened at Fukushima. That report indicates that the possibility of an early fatality, like during the actual incident, is nearly zero, and that the possibility of fatalities in the future, health impacts into the future, is less than 1 in a billion. So I think this confirms our existing knowledge after 50 years of experience that nuclear technology is the safest large-scale energy technology that we have in the world if you compare it to the others. Hydroelectric, even though it's one of the most wonderful forms of power, actually has caused more direct fatalities, mostly through dam breaching, than any accidental breaching of dams, than any other technology. But there are also, of course, health and accident effects from coal and natural gas as well. I'll just talk about Germany for a sec, because everybody's heard that Germany is planning to phase out their nuclear program. They had in fact already made that decision in 2002, when under the previous government of Chancellor Schroeder, in coalition with the Green Party, a law was passed that all their nuclear reactors had to be phased out by 2022. When Chancellor Merkel came in, she didn't have the votes to change that policy, even though, as a PhD chemist, and I think someone who understands science fairly well, she wanted to change it. But only a fairly short time before the Fukushima incident, she was able to finally change it, and then Fukushima happened, and she found herself, her government found itself, in an untenable political position, and they brought back the policy to phase out nuclear power. At the time, the German government said that they would replace the nuclear energy with renewables. We also know they have a very large subsidized program for wind and solar in Germany, although they're cutting back on that now because, as with most of excessive subsidies, it becomes economically unsustainable at a certain point, and that's happened now in a number of European countries. They said they're going to replace it with renewables, but in fact, they had already started construction of 13 gigawatts, that is about 13 nuclear power plants worth, of fossil fuel energy plants before Fukushima happened, because they'd made the decision in 2002 to phase out their reactors, and they will have to build another 10 gigawatts of electric production by 2022. In other words, they are going to vastly increase their fossil fuel consumption for electricity production as a way of replacing the nuclear plants, and in fact that's the only option they have. They don't have the hydroelectric potential to replace the nuclear plants, so they are really going backwards compared to the rest of the world, most of which sees that the future of electricity production is moving off fossil fuels gradually towards more nuclear energy. So it's hard to say what they will eventually do in Germany. Will they really phase out their nuclear plants, or will they come to their senses and realize that they should keep some or all of them operating? We don't know the answer to that. It depends on the political future in the country. Just again to talk about safety in general in the nuclear energy industry. It is the safest technology we have for large-scale electricity production. No member of the public has ever been harmed in North America by nuclear energy, where there are more nuclear plants. Between the United States and Canada, there are 125 nuclear power plants operating today, of the 425 or so that are operating in the world. So it hasn't harmed anybody. In addition, studies have been done. For example, the study on 53,000 nuclear plant workers done by Columbia University in 2004 that showed that they have less cancer, less disease, and live longer than their counterparts in the population at large. In other words, they are healthier than the general population of the United States, which leads you to believe either that a little bit of radiation is good for you, which is, a bit of a joke, but then again there are people who believe that, but at least we know that it's not harming those workers if they're actually healthier than the general population. The same is true of Canadian uranium mine workers who are producing the fuel for much of the power produced in the United States. They too are healthier than the general population. Used fuel, actually, nuclear waste as it's called by a lot of people, is still the primary concern people have. Even more than safety, I would say, in terms of the questions I'm asked by media and interested people in my role as co-chair of the coalition. People want to know, what are we going to do about the nuclear waste problem? And the assertion that there is no solution to the problem of nuclear waste. My first reaction to that is, what problem? The fact is, no one is being harmed by the used nuclear fuel that is stored securely and safely at reactor sites across the country. It is not getting into the environment, and there is little chance that it will in the foreseeable future because it's being stored in very robust 80-ton containers made of the best concrete and reinforced steel we have. I understand you can drop these things out of an aircraft and they will not rupture. You can run them into a brick wall at 100 miles an hour and they won't break. So they're not going to get, it's not going to get out. And one thing we do know how to do is build containers. So if for some reason a container deteriorated 50 years from now, if we still hadn't recycled the used fuel by then, we build a new container and put the used fuel in it and discard or recycle the old one. So that's not rocket science. We know how to keep the used nuclear fuel out of the environment. But the most important part about the used fuel is that it is not waste. A small portion of it is waste, the fission products that resulted from the burning of the uranium. But over 90% of the material left in the used fuel is recyclable. And I was very excited this morning, actually, a briefing by the people at General Electric Hitachi. They are, along with their boiling water reactor, the advanced boiling water reactor that they have now developed and are working to market around the world, they are working on a new fourth generation reactor called the PRISM reactor. This is one of a number of projects going on in the United States and around the world on fourth generation reactors, modular reactors, smaller reactors. There's a whole range of new technologies being worked on. But this PRISM reactor is one of the ones that is actually really going to be able to solve the problem of used nuclear fuel, because it is going to be able to recycle it. And not only will it burn the uranium and plutonium, but it will also burn the other long-lived heavy isotopes, which are called actinides, and use them for energy, leaving behind the fission products, which then only require a few hundred years to decompose or to decay from a radioactive to a non-radioactive form, and not 100,000, or people talked about 250,000 years, referring to plutonium, which has a half-life of 24,000 years. These fission products are much shorter lived, and so recycling the used fuel not only lets us tap into the energy that is still there, but also drastically reduces the difficulty of dealing with the waste products that come from the nuclear stream. There's only 0.7% uranium-235 in natural uranium. That is really all we're burning in the first cycle through a reactor. By using these new fast neutron reactors like the PRISM reactor, we will theoretically, and I believe actually practically, be able to make the fuel 100 times longer, last 100 times longer than it does in the once-through cycle. In other words, the 50 years of used nuclear fuel we have now accumulated will provide the same amount of energy for another 5,000 years. This is why I tell audiences every time I speak that long after the fossil fuels are depleted, whether it's 50, 100, or 300 years from now, there will be nuclear energy to power our civilization for thousands, if not tens of thousands, of years into the future. And as we develop technologies for transportation that can be powered through nuclear energy, charging batteries, for example, we already have the technology to run all our infrastructure, ground source heat pumps, on electricity from nuclear power. As we develop more technologies that can use electricity to produce the services that we require, nuclear energy will be there to provide that electricity. This is a very optimistic thing about the future, because think about it, if the fossil fuels run out, our society depends on fossil fuels for 86%, our whole world civilization, 86% of its energy. That eventually will have to be replaced with something, and that something is nuclear power, with continuing use of hydroelectric, of course, but that's what the main sources of power will be thousands of years into the future. In terms of the nuclear renaissance, there's also a large number of other developments going on in the world. As I mentioned, 60 reactors are presently under construction. That's going to multiply as time goes on. Russia, India, and China, among the three of them, are going to build at least 100 to 150 nuclear reactors in the coming decades, and many other countries are joining in. Russia, for example, is building floating nuclear reactors that they will put on barges in order to take them up the big rivers in Siberia to provide power to remote mining, oil and gas, and just communities there where they're off the grid. That's very interesting. Well, actually, Russia and the United States have both had a lot of floating nuclear reactors. It's called the nuclear navy. And in Russia, all of their aircraft that's part of the nuclear navy, all of their icebreakers in the Arctic are nuclear powered. They're big ones. So a floating reactor is not really anything new. China, for example, has just bought 2 fast neutron, sometimes called breeder, but it's best to call them fast neutron reactors because not all fast neutron reactors are technically breeder reactors. China has just bought 2 of these from Russia, where Russia is pretty advanced in the development of the fast neutron reactor, again for recycling all of the fuel that goes through the light water reactors, which are the ones we have around the world today. India is leading in the thorium fuel cycle. Thorium is another element, like uranium, that can eventually be used to produce nuclear energy, and there is 4 or 5 times as much thorium in the Earth's crust as there is uranium, thus adding more thousands of years of energy supply to our stockpile for the future. Japan and France are both involved in using mixed oxide fuel, where they're taking the plutonium that is produced in the first pass through a reactor and recycling it back and making more plutonium. But that and the United States is also embarking upon the use of mixed oxide fuel as well. But that can only take you so far. In the end, we have to have fleets of fast reactors, and it's great to see that GE is in the forefront of this, and that hopefully we will see this adopted in the near future. Just one more point before we go to questions. That point being, where did I get to with that? Oh yes, the Blue Ribbon Commission. Sorry to pause there. The Blue Ribbon Commission, which was appointed by the President and Secretary Chu of the Department of Energy, has reported in. They were tasked with looking at the future of used nuclear fuel. Again, the most significant technical issue that needs to be addressed in the short term. And they have come back and said that the used nuclear fuel that is now stored at individual reactor sites should be centralized into interim storage facilities. Theoretically then, where it will eventually be recycled and where the waste will then be put in a permanent repository. So we have movement on that front, and hopefully in the not too distant future, willing host communities will be found, they said one or more. It seems to me it's either 1, 2, or 3, and I don't think that's been decided yet. But one in the east and one in the west might make sense. Interim storage sites will be chosen where the communities are willing to do it because they're going to be paid properly and given benefits commensurate with this important task to look after the used nuclear fuel on an interim basis until such time as recycling facilities are constructed. And in the meantime, we do have to find a permanent repository for the fission products and other long-lived nuclear waste that simply has to be put in deep burial for a long period of time. And hopefully that will eventually be accomplished as well. But if we can just get the interim storage sites established and centralize the used nuclear fuel, we will show the public and the detractors of nuclear energy that movement is being made on this front in a direction that they can see is happening, and there can actually be a plan for what to do with the used nuclear fuel. I think I'll end my remarks there. I'm sorry, I'm suffering from a bit of a cold, so my brain isn't working as good as it does on the best of days, but I'll do my best now to take your questions, and thank you very much again for participating today.
Dr. Moore, we do have a couple of questions from our audience. The first one is, how many jobs has new nuclear construction created?
Well, actually, planning for the nuclear renaissance and new nuclear construction is estimated to have already created 15,000 jobs in the United States. There has probably been a bit of a lull in that because of the economic situation lately, but now you have these 2 reactors which will almost certainly now be built in Georgia and 2 more in South Carolina. Already there are 1,000 people on the site at Vogtle in Georgia who have prepared the ground and put up buildings. Quite a lot of work has already been done there prior to obtaining the permit to pour concrete. And in the next months and by the end of this year, there will be something like 4,000 to 5,000 people working on those 2 nuclear reactors at Vogtle, and you can imagine the same number in South Carolina as that project gets underway. So the fact is, if we want to keep nuclear energy as a key component of the U.S. energy supply, we have to build 20 or 30 nuclear reactors in the next couple of decades to replace ones that go offline and to keep up with the growing requirement for energy. And that is going to employ tens of thousands of people in good construction jobs, and then after the reactors are built, employ between 400 and 700 people in each one of those reactors at high wages, good, I mean way better than average wages, for 60 to 80 years. In other words, it's a lifetime of work for many, many people, thousands of people. And it is obviously the way to go. I mean, I still feel in a way a bit responsible, along with the rest of the environmental movement, for not supporting nuclear energy as the best approach from an environmental point of view back in the 70s and 80s. Because if we had kept building nuclear here in the United States at the same rate we were just then, in the 70s and 80s, there'd be 200 nuclear plants in the United States today producing nearly 50% or maybe a little more than 50% of the electricity. Instead, it's the other way around. Nuclear is at 20 and coal is at 50. It probably would have been better both for the conservation of our coal resources, the air quality, and the safety, and a whole bunch of other reasons, if we had 50% nuclear and 20% coal. And remember, France is nearly 80% nuclear, 10% hydroelectric, and virtually no fossil fuels, and the same is true in differing proportions in other countries like Sweden and Switzerland, where they don't even use fossil fuels as a primary electricity component. Of course, they use fossil fuels for transportation and heating and many other things, but they don't use it for electricity, and the United States could, over probably a 100-year period, move in that direction and achieve that same goal if that was set as the goal.
One other question has just come in from the audience. All things considered, what is your educated best guess as to the chances that the United States will actually start building commercial scale variants of any of the Generation 3 or 4 reactor designs before 2020?
Well, before 2020 is probably pushing it, because the folks at PRISM said they might be ready to start on the first prototype 12 years from now. That'd be 2020. So I don't think that's going to happen in the United States before 2020, but certainly that's a reasonable time frame to expect it to begin 8 years out. Of course, I don't have the crystal ball to say which one of these various projects is going to be the first one in the pipe, or which ones will happen and which ones won't. I think GE Hitachi is very serious about this PRISM project, and they see it as their next ambition, now that they haven't got their advanced boiling water reactor approved yet, but that will come in probably fairly short order from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They see this fast neutron PRISM reactor as their next stage, and it's a Generation 4 reactor, advanced reactor, but based on technology that we already know works. Yeah, I've never really been one to do much of a crystal ball, because I don't really believe that people are very good at predicting the future. But I do think it's fair to say that many of these quote new designs for smaller reactors and high temperature reactors and fast neutron reactors have already been proven back in the 60s and 70s. It's just that we didn't continue developing them. We focused entirely on the large-scale light water reactor for commercial power, and so it isn't as if we're totally in the dark on the R&D side. We know these technologies work. For example, small nuclear reactors. The nuclear navy has over 100 of them operating today, and those reactors will run for 30-35 years without refueling underwater in a submarine. So we know how to make these reactors, and no person in the nuclear navy has ever died from radiation on the nuclear subs or aircraft carriers. So they know how to do it safely, even you know, hundreds of feet below the surface of the ocean. So I do believe that these technologies are coming, and you know, truthfully, if it wasn't for the large-scale availability of fossil fuels, which, you know, it's good that we've got them, because otherwise our cars wouldn't start in the morning, and a number of other things. But just say again, for example, that the fossil fuels became seriously depleted in a short time, suddenly nuclear would become the predominant concern, and the huge amounts more resources would be put into developing it, because it really is the best solution for the future in terms of applicability and availability. As hydroelectric is wonderful, it's just that some places are flat and have no rain, or either one or the other or both, and there you can't use hydroelectric power. Whereas nuclear energy is capable of being used anywhere in the world, basically where there's cooling water. And even then they've got them now that they can be cooled by air, so effectively you could put them anywhere on the planet. No more questions?
That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Especially all you CASEnergy members, and if you're not a member, please join the Clean and Safe Energy Coalition.
Where can individuals in our audience go to find out more information and to get more involved?
On the web at cleansafeenergy.org. It's easy to get to. If you can't remember that, just remember Clean and Safe Energy Coalition. That'll take you to the website too. Please sign up. It's free and we need your support.
Well, on behalf of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, I'd like to thank Dr. Moore and CASEnergy for being here. It's a very important issue to Georgia's future. And most importantly, would like to thank all of you for joining us today. Thank you.